Before you paste anything into a generative AI tool, I want you to stop and ask yourself, would I send this to a reporter? And if the answer is no, that's really your cue to pause for a minute and think about the most important rule of working with generative AI in the public sector, and that's data privacy and security. So that's what we're going to be covering in this AI Bytes session. Generative AI brings us a lot of new opportunities for government. It helps us be more efficient, it helps us provide better services to the customers that we serve, and it can bring cost savings. But we also have to balance the risk that comes with that. And a big part of that is with data privacy and how we're managing that. When we think about generative AI tools, they're really not created equally. So risk is really a spectrum based on the type of tool you're using. At the lower end, the more high risk, we have commercial apps, something you can just go to like ChatGPT or Gemini and use without really having to pay, without having to set anything up. And then on the more safe side, you have private tools, things that are hosted on private servers or an enterprise tool that your organization may have. So, for this particular session, when we're talking about how we're using generative AI in state government, I'm really talking about these commercial tools that are readily available and simple to use. So, as we start to talk about risk, I really want us to ground ourselves. So, AI is everywhere, and so are the risks, and many of them aren't visible at first glance. So, a lot of times we're aware that data is being used to train the model. Now, you can often opt out of that. It's possible to say no, but there's other risks that come to it too. So, we have to think about how data is collected and stored. A while back, there was some concerns about DeepSeek AI that collects data and stores it in China. So that includes user data like IP addresses, inputs, even keystroke patterns. And US based services can pose just as much risk at an individual level because of data breaches and bugs. So a while back, ChatGPT had a bug where titles of user conversations were leaked and users had other data exposed. So it's not unlikely that we'll see this type of situation again. And then there's intentional sharing by these AI companies who have data sharing agreements in place with third parties. So we have to be mindful about the tools we're using, whether they're approved through our IT departments or just generally deemed safe, and make sure we're using ones in a responsible way. One of the nice things about working in the public sector is we already have some information about data classification available. So there's some guidelines in place, and those can easily translate into how we're using these commercially available generative AI tools. So for the most part, in Washington state government, it's rated based on categories. So category 3 and 4, where we're looking at real names, confidential documents, personally identifiable information. That's a pretty clear unsafe use. So something we're going to keep out of these tools. And then when we're looking at things like information on the public website, it's category 1. So it's pretty simple to use what's readily out there in generative AI tools without putting your organization or your customers at risk. And you can take cautious use, so stuff that's sensitive, internal information, maybe it has names in it, and you can remove that so that you can bring it down to a safe use. So it's not saying we can only do stuff if it's published on the website, but looking really at the data that's there and how we can redact, remove, replace, sanitize to make sure that we're removing these different elements that shouldn't be used in these tools. So I want to leave you with just a simple checklist for safer generative AI practices. First, just assume your prompts are private. If it's not something that you'd share with a reporter or put on your website, keep it out of the generative AI tools. And then avoid unsafe or those red uses, making sure we're not having those personal information out there. And then replacing elements with big data if that's an option, and still keep your information secure. And then if your organization has an enterprise tool, using that rather than the commercial tools available can help increase that privacy. And then the final one when it comes to hallucinations is to use different capabilities that are available in these tools, like browsing, and making sure that you're verifying the outputs that you get so there's a human in the loop.